Time is a funny thing. Monday is a leap year, 29th of February, and people can get very excited about that for some reason. Hi, I'm Rod, and time for me is a more important issue because I'm an astrologer, and astrologers are very much concerned about what day you're born and what time you're born and even what place you're born. And that's basically because the sky looks very different from wherever you are and whatever the time of day may be. So when we construct a map of the sky, we are always very concerned that those kind of details are accurate because otherwise the whole astrological reading is going to go wrong. But think about this. What is this business of a leap year? I mean, we know, we've learnt at school that our calendar is inaccurate and we require this leap year in order to make it gel more with actual natural cycles. So, what I wanted to talk a little bit about today was if that's the case, I mean, time is this construct, if you like, this calendar is a construct. How does that affect what people like me do, where we're actually relying on accurate and correct measures of time? And what does that really say about how we live our lives? I mean, my question is, whose time is this? We are operating on a system of time. Is time some kind of an objective thing? So, where do we even get this calendar? I mean, what a year really is, in fact, isn't even time to begin with. Astrology, since ancient times and ancient people, even without astrology, had a strong relationship between time and space because they watched the sky to measure time. They understood something about its relationship with space. That, most simply put, could be that wherever you are on the earth, there is a difference in what the time of day will be and where the sun may be found in the sky. In fact, even the ancient Romans were very clear on that. The calendar that we have, the whole time-telling system that we have, is essentially ancient Roman, where the Romans were already beginning to understand the relationship between distance from the equator and time. Let's face it, they ran an empire. And in order to run an empire, you need to have a certain amount of control, don't we know it, over everything and everyone. And the most fundamental way to control is to control time and space itself, to control our actual experience of the material world. That would be controlling time and space. It's not only about that kind of control, it's also about administrative control. As the Roman Empire expanded and they were at different latitudes and different longitudes, they understood that in order to better run their empire, they needed a better way to describe time. The earliest calendars were strictly agricultural and were indeed created by watching the sky. And if you watch the sun, you are going to gradually get a kind of slightly distorted picture of what the days and sky is all about. Because, of course, the earth itself is moving. So we might watch the position of the sun from day to day, but we're watching it from a moving object. Of course, to us, that's why the sun even moves. But even so, makes it problematical for us because we're not going to get an accurate measure like that. More about that later, but that is still the problem that existed in the actual Roman calendar itself. The origin of our calendar is really the Emperor Julius Caesar. And Caesar establishes the calendar, like most Roman empires do, kind of emperors around themselves. So Caesar creates a calendar that already does require a leap year system, and that system is a leap year is required every 3 years. The calendar is not very accurate, but it's that calendar that in fact is the origin of the idea that the year even begins on January the 1st. I mean, the fact that the year begins on January the 1st bears absolutely no relationship to anything in nature at all. There are no natural cycles that begin at that time. The solar cycle or the seasonal cycle is not related to that time. Ancient people would have measured the year from March, which is when the spring equinox would have happened in Babylon and in other ancient empires. It's made to January by the Roman emperor because January is named after the Roman god Janus, who is the god of doorways. So, because it's the beginning of the year, that's where the idea that the beginning of January is the beginning of the year. But it's interesting because you can argue that by removing the year from the natural cycles and imposing a year based strictly on political and religious ideas, it's a Roman god, the empire is gaining much greater control over the people because it's now the empire that says, I'll tell you when something begins and something ends. You can't even look at the sky to know that information. It's not going to help you. And we've seen there's a long tradition following from then, and no doubt before then as well, where politics and especially religion are used to control people's natural experiences. Some other day we can talk about how religion controls our sexuality and our bodies and all sorts of ways it has grown into controlling what is otherwise natural. But the starting point is really the calendar. So January the 1st is not a good day to measure a beginning of a year in terms of anything natural, but it remains actually the beginning of our year. And although it did eventually fall away after the Roman Empire in medieval times, they were back to using March, which is the natural beginning of the year. There was a movement in the 16th century to restore January the 1st, and it didn't take very long for that to happen. During the 17th century, January the 1st became the beginning of the year again, and once again established a different empirical control that was now the Christian calendar, which was well established by then, but became much more so in that 17th century when Pope Gregory reformed the calendar because it was not accurate. The fact is that even with the 3-day leap year, the leap year every 3 years, the calendar would go out. And if we allowed the calendar to keep on going out like that, the seasons stopped getting synchronized with our calendar. Instead of taking the calendar from the seasons, we'd imposed our calendar on the seasons, but the seasons care not what we think. So we have to keep on adjusting our calendar to fit with the seasons, and of course also to fit with the concept of what high holy days and religious holidays actually are. So one of the very important functions of a calendar is to say when you should worship this and when this happened in some religious order and so on. And in fact, traditionally, and even in some places around the world to this very day, most days have some kind of religious association with them, and that is actually the means of keeping time. But Gregory instituted a very significant change, and that was to institute the calendar as we know it, which is now called the Gregorian calendar. And there, the idea was more clearly understood that that the year is 365 and a quarter, but it's not a perfect quarter. But basically, the calendrical change that Gregory instituted changed the leap year to occurring every 4 years, but still contains the error that the mathematics is not perfect. That was understood. So in order to make this Gregorian calendar work, this is the calendar that we use to this very day that gives us the pleasure of February the 29th. That Gregorian calendar means we add a day every 4 years, but not every 100 years. So 25 fours make 100. So every 25th one of those, we don't do it. So every 100 years, we don't add a day. But every 400 years, we do. So after 25 years, 25 leap years, we skip it. And after 50 leap years, we skip it. And after 75 leap years, we skip it. But one more, and then suddenly we add it back again. So every 100 years, there isn't a leap year, but every 400 years, there is a leap year. And you can imagine what it takes to keep a calendar like that. It illustrates well to us how inaccurate our calendar is, really, but it also illustrates to us the level of control, which is not necessarily like in a conspiracy theory sense of the word, but still, if you control people's experience of time and space, it's a very powerful control. So it illustrates the level of that control, where it's keeping the the human species on track according to our march of time, which indeed in this Gregorian calendar we measure from the supposed time of Jesus Christ's birth. And we have all the evidence in the world to show that our calendar is not really related to the birth of Christ, because we don't know when he was born, one. And secondly, the count started later and was miscalculated later, all of which was demonstrated in the medieval period already. So we know that our calendar has really little to do with that, and our way of measuring years has little to do with that. But isn't it amazing what kind of hold they have, that we treat religious anniversaries, and for that matter anniversaries of anything else, as if they in themselves are some kind of a gospel. Take the whole idea of Christmas, which, apart from the somewhat obvious fact that the birth of Christ probably couldn't have happened in the middle of December, judging by the story that is told, that sounds like spring. But more importantly, we know that it's got association with other Roman dates that it was attached to, as well as other cultural dates. Also, from what I've just told you, you know that the anniversary from 25th of December to 25th of December to 25th of December is an adjustment in the first place. And so these measurements become increasingly unrelated to any kind of reality at all. So again, it is really, you might think of it as a convenience, but it's a form of managing how we actually perceive the reality. Again, I'm stressing, I'm not claiming or seeing that as any kind of conspiracy. But certainly the consciousness of it, both in Caesar's time and in Pope Gregory's time, is to maintain the order and the harmony of the earth under heaven, that we are told in a top-down fashion what to do and how to experience things. The original conspiracy is for our good, presumably, but nevertheless, it tells us, what does this day mean? Even the notion of a weekend does that, and importantly, February the 29th. I remember at school when, people would say, if you were born on February the 29th, you only had a birthday every 4 years, which I suppose technically is true if you absolutely stuck on that number, 29 February. But there will be a 365 and just under a quarter cycle exactly, that month much later, which occurs, what your calendar says is on the 1st of March, but of course is indeed the 29th of February. It's interesting that we've got lots of cultural rituals about the 29th of February, a good example which still persists in Western society, despite its supposed post-feminist point in history, is this idea that in general males must ask females to marry, but on the 29th of February females can ask males to marry. Fortunately, we live in a more enlightened age, both from a point of view of gender equality and also in terms of who can marry who, but traditions like that persist and demonstrate well for us this idea that the calendar is really a cultural artifact and is not actually related to the proper measurement of time. It's related more to the management of time. Because after all, as I said in the beginning, time is really space. Time is really space. Because what we've been calling a year is, of course, the orbit of the Earth around the Sun. It's a spatial event. It's not actually a measurement of time itself. So ancient people well understood the relationship between time and space on Earth and latitude, because they measured time from the sun. That sundial that works in your garden measures time by essentially the length and position of a shadow, derived from the latitude of the place that they're at. It can also be used to measure what that latitude actually is. So they understood distance from the equator as relating to time, and what would later be called longitude is also related to time, of course, as well. But longitude is a later idea and only really becomes significant when you are comparing the time of two places, and in terms of longitude these days, compared to London, to work out what the time is. In modern times, we use longitude to tell us what the time is. I live in Cape Town, and if I used longitude to tell me what the time is, I'd actually end up an hour earlier than the rest of the country. So somewhere along the line, even longitude was homogenized into what we call time zones. That was mostly to help control the trains that were running around the then British Empire. But empire again, that it is. So not only, I mean, this is what the astrologer Daniel Brown in the UK says, not only are leap years the result of mathematical work, they are also the consequences of rulers imposing their will on people's day-to-day life and the gradual understanding of our place in the universe, also related to that. As he says, controlling calendars means controlling the rhythms of a culture. And you can see that to this very day in the commercial idea of what the 29th of February should really be all about. So attached are we to those kind of dates that we often fail to realize that they can't possibly be attached to anything outside of themselves. So people might ask me, what is the meaning of the 29th of February astrologically? Or what is the meaning of Christmas astrologically? And astrologically, dates don't have a particular meaning. The use of is it 29 days or 30 days or 31 days in the month, all of those are the same culturally controlled rhythms that are imposed by state, by church, by convention, and in our day, by commercialism. Think February the 14th, Valentine's Day, which became Valentine's Week, which became Valentine's Month. And then someone can go to an astrologer and say, what is the significance of February the 14th astrologically? So let's get to the fact that astrologers don't really care for that kind of time at all. Astrologers, having to measure everything so accurately, had to devise a better way of working with time in the first place. So astrologers don't actually use the sun to measure time. The sun gives us our measurements of the 24-hour day. Well, when we average its apparent movement out, it's approximately 24 hours. But in reality, depending on which way you measure it, it's generally 23 hours, 56 minutes and 48 seconds, and by some other measurements, just over 24 hours. It's not exactly constant from day to day either. It varies ever so slightly. All of those things need to be taken into account by astrologers. And so astrology uses the positions of the stars in the sky in order to measure time. And the stars, from our point of view, change their position so unbelievably slowly that it becomes perfectly adequate to use them to measure time accurately. And what we do as astrologers is we measure it since the equinox, about the 23rd of March or the 23rd of September. We measure from there using the accurate rotation of the Earth because we're measuring it against the stars, not measuring it against the sun, and we end up with a much more accurate version of the day. So it is interesting that not only are our days, our calendar by days completely man-made, but in many ways so are our actual daylight hours. I mean, think about this. Why does the day start at midnight? Surely it makes more sense that the day should begin at sunrise. Well, that was true to the ancient Babylonians, but some ancient cultures, like the ancient Jews, began their day at sunset. While the Romans might have originally had some sunrise system, the fact is that the 0 hours midnight day, that sounds so modern, was invented by the Romans in about 45 BC. And that, again, was in order to institute certain kinds of control. The Romans named the hours and periods of the hour, and that all gave the rhythm of the day. So in the same way that the calendar is constructed to create the rhythm of the culture at the day-by-day level, within that day, the 24 hours are controlled in order to control the rhythm of the society. Very evident, again, in religious cultures who have classical ideas about what hour of the day is good for what and when you should pray and what time you have to get up and go and chant, and all of those kind of things are very much simplified when you have control over all the hours and you say where they begin, because sunset happens at a little bit of a later time relative to, say, the beginning of March or noon every day. It changes day by day. So that's, all related again to the tilt of the earth and the changing seasons. When time was originally done by dividing the day into 12 hours and the night into 12 hours, those hours were not of equal length. And the Romans themselves understood that latitude, the further away you get from the equator, the shorter or longer the day is going to become, depending on which season you're in. Doesn't help if you've got an empire and you've got people all over the known planet trying to do things. So the Romans institute this 0 hours as the idea of when a day begins. And it's striking how powerful that idea is in our culture. I mean, think of New Year's Eve. The eruption of as if an actual something had changed at that 0 hour moment. And the if you miss it, you've basically missed it. And you kind of can't celebrate it another time. You can't celebrate your birthday on the wrong day. It just somehow doesn't feel as if that's the right thing. And the same issue with time as well. The whole issue of the day reminds me of this time when it was an African ceremony, shamanistic ceremony, Sangoma ceremony, was due to take place. I was in a rural area, and the ceremony was supposed to happen on that day, and midnight was approaching, and the Sangoma in charge was a little concerned because the momentum hadn't reached the point where people were going to get up and start their dances and the rituals could happen. And he turned to another one of the Sangomas and said, "What are we going to do? You know, midnight is coming and we haven't done the ceremony and it's going to be on the wrong day." And she said, "You know, I don't think the ancestors really care if midnight passes as long as we do it tonight." And tonight was, well, the sun went down earlier, people gradually started arriving, we started working with the drums, we're building up a momentum, and eventually it's going to happen, and it's still kind of tonight. And the ceremony happened at 3 a.m., and it was the most amazing ceremony. And I remember thinking, you know, what do the African ancestors care about 0 hours really? After the sun went down, people danced all night long, eventually went to sleep, and the next day the sun came up. And that seems to be the more natural way to work with time. So interesting. I mean, going back to that would make our world very difficult. We do need to synchronize time. We are a global culture. We, let alone railways from the British Empire. We've got lots of reasons to manage time well. So all I really wanted to do is ask you the question kind of, whose time is it? And that's what you sometimes need to think about when we get a little bit obsessed with time. Yes, be on time for your meetings. I don't like it when people come late for their appointments with me. But certainly, in terms of getting overly worried about specific dates and all of those kind of things, just remember, whose time is it anyway? When thinking about February the 29th or February the 14th and worrying about those kind of things, remind yourself, whose time is it anyway? And somewhere along the line, I challenge you somehow and somewhere to take charge of your own time, to put away your watch or your cell phone time for a day and live that day as nature intends. The sun comes up and the sun goes down. Different things are done in the day and different things are done in the night. Don't check your watch. Don't worry, I've got to be up at 7 a.m. for work tomorrow. And experience a little bit of what a day really means in nature. It might be a little bit unnerving, but I've got a feeling time would seem to go much slower. And wouldn't that be a worthy reward of letting go of all of that political time? Just a thought. So Astrology 101 today also deals with that question, coincidentally. And I received a question from Linda who wanted to know, what are these houses that astrologers talk about all the time? You've heard me say that a few times on this show. What are these houses that astrology talks about? And it's a worthy question because it relates directly to this discussion about time. And that is that astrologers look at the planets and they see them move through the zodiac slowly, day by day. But that doesn't take into account our experience of the days going by. It's a little bit like it leaves the Earth out of the equation. Astrologers were looking at all these other planets, yes, from the point of view of the Earth, but it somehow didn't encompass the actual earthly experience. In order for astrology to make sense, it needs to be brought back down to Earth so that it relates to our everyday lives. And the artful way that astrologers devise to do that is through the use of time and space. Remember, in our modern sensibility, time and space are the two things which construct the idea of the third dimension, the world that we live in, the physical, tangible world. Einstein demonstrated to us that they're relative to each other and that they're kind of parts of the same thing. And I've spoken about this elsewhere on the show. You can listen back to earlier episodes. But bringing that down to Earth, astrologers use that relativity of time and space to make the picture of the sky local to where you're looking from on Earth. So the way that they did that is by firstly looking at where the horizon was. That's very local to the time and place that you're looking at it. And then watching the sun and, of course, the other planets as they rose and moved through the sky. And essentially, the way that they counted those six spaces that became the spaces they used above the sky, really the way they were counting hours originally was to watch the movement of the sky. So originally they watched, and after 1 hour they said it's over there, and then after another hour it's over there, and that's going to change from day to day, from season to season. That eventually becomes 2 hour segments. So the entire sky above the horizon could be divided into 6 stages of time and space that are entirely local to where you are. The ancient Greeks had ideas about what those segments meant. For example, when something's high up, it's at its peak. When it's rising, it's becoming prominent. When it's setting, it's dying or disappearing. And gradually those ideas evolved into the different influences or meanings of different areas of the sky, the houses, which really describe the day-by-day journey of the planets and the sun as they go around the Earth, as seen from the time and place where you are. It localizes, it makes it all about you, it brings it back down to Earth, and gave the astrologers the power to talk about everyday things, not just great big archetypal things. To me, the exciting thing about that kind of stuff is that it shows how well versed our ancestors were in thinking about Earth and the cosmos and understanding the nature of the Earth. They might not have had everything right, but they definitely had a lot more knowledge than we often give them credit for. And so finally, it's time for your questions. And I have a question from Lindy today asking whether this is a great time to be visiting her siblings in various parts of the land. Lindy, although travel is not shown in such a huge way right now in your chart, siblings are. Your particular planet for siblings is the moon. Could be anyone, but time and place determine that for people. So yours is the moon, and the moon, the Venus today, as I'm talking to you, is in the same position as the moon. Venus talks about the people we love and what we value correctly in our lives, and makes links with people and things according to our value system. So that makes the answer yes. At the very least, this is a great time to be phoning them, to be connecting with them, to make that family connection stronger than ever. Visiting them would be an ideal way to do that. I've also got a question from Relin, and Relin wants to know whether this is a good time to change career because she's beginning to feel a bit stuck and bored. So look, we always eventually feel stuck and bored. All careers have their earthly, mundane component. You said that it is mentally stimulating, and looking at your chart, Relin, those are the best kind of jobs for you. Your chart says things to do with numbers that are mentally challenging, that require mathematical analysis, although that can sometimes also mean analyzing words as well, analyzing text. But numbers and the skill of numbers and their analysis works very well for you because you need mentally stimulating. If it's in accounts or things like that, obviously it will get routine, but that's also about life on earth. You get most satisfied when you feel that you're providing a service or being helpful in some way, not being a servant. Providing a service or being helpful in some kind of a way. But it doesn't have to be in a grand way of I'm serving the planet and people really need me. As long as you're connecting people with things or doing things for them that they can't do for themselves, you'll be feeling that you're doing the right thing. Bottom line is, though, that this isn't quite the right time to be doing that. For you, after September is a better time to be looking at any changes that you might want to. But I want to add one more thing. By then, I think you'll have just turned 50 years old. And there is a bit of a lull between about 49 and 51, where it's natural to feel a bit of a lull. There's an end of a major cycle that gradually happens at that time. And it might take us until 51, 52 even, to start getting new things underway. They're natural lulls. I was talking about the seasons earlier on. We don't panic when winter arrives. We know that it's making us fertile. It's making the world fertile for whatever's next. So sometimes that can also be why we feel stuck in some situations. So again, in your chart, not yet really an ideal time to change. Look at it again after September. See if it's still necessary, especially in the bigger picture of, is this really what I need right now? So remember, every week I'll deal with your questions, any personal questions, anything that's happening in your life, just visit me on this website or send me an email to this email address, and I'll be able to help you with your question right here on air. Remember to reach me by Wednesday, because by Thursday I'm making this recording for you. Also, Astrology 101, questions about anything you like. Join me every Friday back at noon right here. See you next week.